Behind the badge, beyond the call of duty, lies a darkness few ever witness. Welcome, seekers of the disquieting truth, to Nightmare True Horror. Tonight, we present 7 true accounts from the front lines, where the protectors themselves face horrors that defy procedure. What unsettling encounters with authority have you harbored in silence? The comments await your own whispered reports. If the chilling reality of these events compels you, consider joining our precinct of the unnerved. A subscription ensures you're always on call for the next terrifying dispatch. Settle in, for the cases we're opening tonight are particularly disturbing, and the final, most unsettling revelation demands your full attention until the very last report is filed. The red and blue lights that appeared in my rearview mirror at 11:43 p.m. didn't belong to any police car I'd ever seen. No county sheriff decals, no state police markings, just a plain dark sedan with a single dashboard light, pulsing against the Arkansas darkness like a predator's heartbeat. I was driving home from a client meeting in Little Rock, taking the rural route through Pope County to save time. The road was empty, surrounded by dense pine forest that seemed to swallow my headlight beams. As I pulled onto the gravel shoulder, something about the approaching figure felt wrong. His uniform was too generic. Just police stamped on a badge that caught no light, pants that didn't fit properly, boots that made no sound on the gravel. But it was his eyes that truly terrified me. Cold, calculating, studying me like I was already his. I'm Rebecca Martinez, a 29-year-old insurance investigator used to working late and driving alone. I had handled thousands of cases, interviewed crime victims, studied predator patterns. I should have recognized the signs immediately. License and registration, he said, shining a flashlight directly into my eyes. The beam was harsh, deliberate, designed to blind rather than illuminate. "What's the violation, officer?" I asked, fumbling for my documents. "Taillights out." Safety hazard, but he hadn't been behind me long enough to see my taillights, and I'd had the car serviced yesterday. As I handed over my license, he studied it far too long, memorizing details that weren't his business. "Rebecca Martinez, 1247 Oak Street, apartment 2B. He recited my address with casual familiarity. Live alone? My blood turned to ice. That information wasn't on my driver's license. "How do you know where I live?" "Standard background check," he said, but his smile revealed the lie. "You work late often? Drive this route regularly?" These weren't traffic stop questions. This was reconnaissance. "Can I have my license back? I'd like to get home." "First, I need you to step out for a field sobriety test." He moved closer to my window, and I could see the equipment on his belt: handcuffs, zip ties, a taser, tools for abduction, not law enforcement. "I haven't been drinking." "Standard procedure. Step out of the vehicle." Every instinct screamed danger. Real cops didn't conduct sobriety tests for broken taillights. They wrote tickets and moved on. "I'd like to see your badge number and call this in to dispatch," I said. His friendly mask slipped completely. "Get out of the car. Now." I started my engine instead. "You're making a mistake," he said, his hand moving to his weapon, but I was already accelerating, gravel spraying as I pulled back onto the asphalt. In my mirror, I watched him run to his sedan. Within seconds, those fake police lights were following me again, but now I knew what they really were: hunting tools. For 20 terrifying minutes, he pursued me through the winding mountain roads, his more powerful engine gaining ground every time I hit a straightaway. When I finally reached the 24-hour truck stop at Highway 64, I ran inside screaming for help. The night manager called 911, but by the time real police arrived, the fake officer was gone. Detective Williams took my statement seriously. "You're the 4th woman to report this in 6 months," he said. "Same pattern. Rural roads, late night, unmarked car with dash lights." "Did he hurt the others?" "2 were still missing." The investigation revealed disturbing details. My car had been fitted with a GPS tracker, probably placed weeks earlier while I was in meetings. He'd been studying my routines, learning my schedule, waiting for the perfect opportunity. They found evidence he'd researched me online. My work address, my apartment building, my social media posts about working late. This wasn't random predation. It was systematic stalking using law enforcement impersonation as his weapon. But they never caught him. The fake police car was stolen, the tracking device untraceable. He'd vanished into the vast network of rural roads where he'd probably been hunting for years. 3 months later, I received a package at my new address in another state. Inside was a newspaper clipping about a missing teacher from Missouri, last seen driving alone on a county road after working late. The attached note read, "Some opportunities are worth waiting for. He's still out there, still using fake police authority to make women comply with their own abductions, still researching victims, still tracking their movements, still waiting for that perfect moment when someone drives alone on a dark road. And every time I see flashing lights now, even legitimate ones, I remember that not everyone with a badge is there to protect you. Sometimes they're there to make you disappear. They say police have seen it all, but some horrors defy explanation. Our next true account will test that very notion." The first sound that made my blood run cold was the wet, meaty thud coming from the room next to mine at 9:47 p.m., not the sharp crack of someone slapping a table or dropping a file. This was the sound of flesh hitting flesh, followed by a low moan that was quickly muffled. I had been sitting alone in this windowless interrogation room for 40 minutes, told to wait while they processed my paperwork, but the sounds bleeding through the thin walls suggested they were processing something else entirely. Thud, muffled cry, scraping of chairs. I pressed my ear against the cold cinder block wall, straining to make sense of what I was hearing. The voices were too distorted to understand, but the rhythm was unmistakable. Someone was being beaten, and they were trying to keep quiet about it. That's when I heard Detective Morrison's voice, clear and calm through the wall. "Now, are you ready to tell us what really happened at the Morrison farm?" My stomach dropped. Morrison, the same name as the detective who'd arrested me 3 hours ago for allegedly vandalizing the mayor's campaign signs. The same detective who'd smiled too widely when he'd cuffed me and said, "Don't worry, son, we'll get this all sorted out real quick." In that sterile room, listening to violence unfold just feet away, I realized I wasn't here about vandalism at all, and I began to understand that in Millfield, population 3,200, some conversations happened with more than just words. My name is Danny Rodriguez, and until November 15th, 2023, I thought I understood how small-town justice worked. I was a 24-year-old freelance journalist who'd driven down to Millfield, Ohio from Cleveland to investigate reports of environmental contamination near the local farming community. Nothing dramatic, just a piece about groundwater issues and agricultural runoff for an environmental blog. I'd been in town for 2 days, staying at the Millfield Motor Inn and interviewing local farmers about their wells and crop yields. The story was routine until I started asking questions about Morrison Agribusiness, the largest farm operation in the county, owned by a family that had apparently run things in Millfield for 3 generations. That's when people stopped talking. Conversations that had been friendly and open suddenly became guarded. Farmers who'd been eager to discuss their concerns about water quality clammed up the moment I mentioned the Morrison name. By my second evening, I was getting the distinct impression that I'd stumbled into something bigger than agricultural runoff. The vandalism charge was obviously trumped up. Detective Morrison had shown me photos of spray-painted campaign signs for the incumbent mayor, Morrison's brother, according to the nameplate on his desk. But the red paint on the signs didn't match the red marker I'd been carrying. The timing didn't work either. The vandalism had supposedly occurred while I was having dinner at the local diner with 3 witnesses, but none of that seemed to matter to Detective Morrison, who brought me in for questioning, and then left me alone in this room while he handled other business. The other business, based on the sounds coming through the wall, involved someone getting the kind of interview that didn't require asking many questions. The voices next door grew louder, and I could make out more details. A younger man pleading, "I told you, I don't know anything about the water tests. I just work the fields." Detective Morrison's response was measured, almost conversational. "See, that's the problem, Jake. People have been talking to reporters, sharing information that's nobody's business but ours. Makes me think someone's been coaching folks on what to say." Another wet thud, followed by a sharp intake of breath. "Now, my nephew Marcus saw you talking to that reporter at the diner yesterday. Real friendly conversation looked like. What exactly did you tell him about our wells? I realized with growing horror that Jake, whoever he was being beaten because of me. Because he talked to me about the groundwater issues on his farm. Because someone had seen us together and reported back to the Morrison family. The scraping of chairs continued, and I heard Detective Morrison's voice getting closer to the wall separating our rooms. Here's what's going to happen, Jake. You're going to go home, and you're going to forget you ever talked to any reporters. You're going to tell your neighbors that the water's fine, that there's nothing to worry about, and that anyone who says different is just trying to stir up trouble. But the tests, the sound that followed was sharper, like something hard connecting with bone. Jake's voice disappeared into a wet gurgle. There are no tests, Morrison continued. There never were any tests, and if I hear about any more tests, or any more conversations with outsiders, we're going to have this conversation again. Except next time, it won't be here at the station where I have to be careful about noise. My hands were shaking as I tried to process what I was hearing. This wasn't just police intimidation. This was a systematic effort to silence anyone who might expose whatever the Morrison family was trying to hide. Environmental contamination was serious. But people don't usually resort to violence to cover it up unless the stakes are much higher than crop damage. The door to the adjacent room opened, and I heard footsteps in the hallway. Heavy boots on linoleum, moving deliberately toward my room. I quickly sat back down at the metal table and tried to look like I hadn't been listening. Detective Morrison opened my door 30 seconds later, and the first thing I noticed was his knuckles, raw and swollen, with traces of blood across the first 2 fingers of his right hand. He caught me looking and smiled. Not the professional smile from earlier, but something colder and more predatory. "Sorry about the wait," he said, settling into the chair across from me. "Had to handle some other business first." He opened a manila folder and spread out the photos of the vandalized campaign signs, but his eyes never left my face. The silence stretched for nearly a minute before he spoke again. "You know what I find interesting about these signs, Danny? They were all hit on the same night you've been in town, asking questions about things that don't concern you." "I was at the diner when this happened," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I have witnesses." "Witnesses can be mistaken," Morrison replied casually. "Memory's a funny thing. People remember what they want to remember, especially when they're trying to help out a friend." He leaned back in his chair, and I could see dark stains on his uniform shirt that hadn't been there when he'd arrested me. "Z, what concerns me is this pattern of outside agitators coming into our community, stirring up trouble, getting people worked up about problems that don't exist. Makes me wonder if the vandalism is just the tip of the iceberg." Morrison opened another folder, this one containing printouts of my articles and blog posts from the past year. He'd done his homework, researching not just my current story, but my entire professional background. "Environmental journalism," he read aloud, "specializing in corporate malfeasance and regulatory violations. That's a fancy way of saying you make a living causing problems for hardworking families." "I report facts," I said. "If those facts cause problems, maybe the problems were already there." Morrison's smile disappeared. He leaned forward, close enough that I could smell coffee and something metallic on his breath. Here's a fact for you, Danny. Sometimes people who stick their noses where they don't belong end up with broken noses. Sometimes they end up with worse. The threat was clear, but Morrison delivered it in the same conversational tone he'd used with Jake next door. This was routine for him. Intimidation disguised as professional questioning. "Now, about your involvement in the vandalism," he continued, pulling out a pen and a blank incident report. "I'm going to need you to walk me through your evening yesterday. Every place you went, every person you talked to, every conversation you had about our community." I realized this wasn't about vandalism at all. Morrison was using the fake charges to build a database of everyone I'd contacted. Everyone who might have shared information about the Morrison family's operations. He was going to use my own investigation to identify and silence potential witnesses. "I want a lawyer," I said. Morrison's pen stopped moving. He looked up at me with those same cold eyes, and for a moment, I thought he was going to hit me too. "Lawyers cost money," he said finally, "and they ask questions. Sometimes they ask questions that make people uncomfortable, that dredge up old business that's better left buried." He stood up and walked to the door, then turned back to face me. "Tell you what, Danny, I'm going to step out for a few minutes. Let you think about whether you really want to complicate things with lawyers and formal charges. Maybe you'll realize that the smart thing, the safe thing, is to accept that you made a mistake, pay a small fine, and head back to Cleveland with a better understanding of how things work in small communities." Morrison left the room, but he didn't lock the door. The message was clear. I could walk out any time I wanted, as long as I was willing to abandon my investigation and keep quiet about what I'd heard. I sat there for another 20 minutes, listening to the sounds of the station around me. Normal police business. Phones ringing, officers talking, paperwork being shuffled. But underneath it all, I could hear something else. The sound of Jake being let out through what sounded like a back exit, his footsteps uneven and labored. When Morrison returned, he was carrying a cup of coffee and my car keys. "Good news," he said, setting the keys on the table. "We've decided the evidence isn't strong enough to pursue charges. Looks like you're free to go. Just like that. Just like that." Sometimes these misunderstandings resolve themselves when people have time to think things through. I picked up my keys, but Morrison's hand shot out and grabbed my wrist before I could stand up. "Of course, if more vandalism occurs after you leave town, we'll know where to look. And if any more reporters show up asking questions about our water supply, we'll know who sent them." His grit was strong enough to bruise, and his knuckles were still raw from his conversation with Jake. Small towns have long memories, Danny. We remember who our friends are, and we remember who caused trouble. You strike me as a smart young man, smart enough to know which category you want to be in. I drove straight back to Cleveland that night, stopping only for gas and coffee. I told myself I was being smart, avoiding a dangerous situation, choosing discretion over confrontation. But the truth was simpler. I was terrified. I filed my story anyway, but without Jake's testimony or the water test results he'd mentioned, I couldn't prove anything substantial. The piece ran as a general overview of agricultural concerns in rural Ohio, mentioning Millfield only in passing. No follow-up investigation, no environmental scandal, no justice for whatever the Morrison family was hiding. 3 weeks later, I found a news brief buried in the back pages of the Cleveland Plain Dealer. Jake Morrison, not just Jake, had died in a farming accident on his family's property, crushed by a piece of machinery that had apparently malfunctioned while he was working alone. The brief mentioned that Jake had been the nephew of Detective Morrison and the cousin of Mayor Morrison. It noted that he'd been struggling with depression and alcohol abuse, suggesting that the accident might have been intentional. I tried calling the Millfield Police Department to ask about the investigation, but the number had been disconnected. When I looked up the town online, I found that Millfield had been officially incorporated into the neighboring county seat, its independent police force disbanded, and its records transferred to state archives. Detective Morrison had retired. According to public records, Mayor Morrison had moved to Florida. Morrison Agribusiness had been sold to a national corporation that immediately implemented new environmental protocols, suggesting there had indeed been problems worth covering up. Jake Morrison was buried in the family plot at Millfield Cemetery, according to his obituary. The only mourners mentioned were his parents and surviving siblings. I never went back to Millfield, and I never followed up on the environmental story. But sometimes, late at night when I'm working on other investigations, I think about the sounds I heard through that interrogation room wall. I think about Jake's voice, pleading for understanding that never came. And I wonder how many other small towns have their own Detective Morrison, and how many other Jake Morrisons have died in accidents after asking the wrong questions. Last month, I received an envelope with no return address, postmarked from a town I'd never heard of in rural Kentucky. Inside was a newspaper clipping about groundwater contamination and a handwritten note. "They're doing it here too. Can you help?" I still have that letter, and every time I look at it, I hear Detective Morrison's voice echoing in my memory. Small towns have long memories, Danny. We remember who caused trouble. I'm still trying to decide if I remember how to be brave enough to cause the right kind of trouble. If that story sent a chill down your spine, prepare yourself. The next tale we're about to uncover might just freeze you in place. The blue in those flashing lights, the ones that suddenly appeared in my rearview mirror, painting the deserted county road in strobing, terrifying relief. It just seemed a shade too vibrant, too new. That, and the way my heart, which had leapt with initial, desperate relief, suddenly clenched with a different, colder kind of fear. Help had arrived, or so I desperately wanted to believe. But why did every instinct scream that this wasn't help at all? My name is Sarah. I'm a nurse used to long shifts and late-night drives home. This was about a year ago, late October. I was driving back from my shift at Oak Haven General, around 2 a.m. County Road 17 is a lonely stretch, especially that time of night. Just miles of dark woods, dairy farms, and the occasional flickering streetlight that only seemed to deepen the shadows. My old Honda was usually reliable. Usually. The first subtle sign that this night was going to curdle into a nightmare was the radio. It had been playing some soft rock station, then suddenly cut out with a burst of sharp, crackling static, followed by dead silence. I fiddled with the dial, annoyed. Then, just as quickly, the station came back, clear as a bell. Weird, I muttered. I glanced in my rear view, far behind me, almost at the edge of vision. I thought I saw a brief flicker of lights, like another car cresting a distant hill. But the road behind me should have been empty for miles. Was I just tired, my eyes playing tricks? A few minutes later, thump, whump, whump. My stomach dropped. Flat tire, on this road, at this hour. Perfect. I pulled over to the gravel shoulder, the silence of the surrounding woods pressing in as I cut the engine. My cell phone, predictably, showed no service. Of course. I got out, popped the trunk, wrestled with the spare and the jack in the dim glow of my hazard lights. A growing sense of vulnerability creeping up my spine. The air was cold, smelling of damp leaves and distant wood smoke. That's when I saw them. Headlights approaching from behind, then the unmistakable red and blue strobes of a patrol car. Relief washed over me, so potent it almost buckled my knees. Thank God. I waved a little too enthusiastically. The patrol car, a dark sedan, slowed and pulled up behind me, its spotlight sweeping across my disabled vehicle, then fixing on me, blindingly bright. A man got out, tall, silhouetted against the flashing lights. He had the shape of a cop. Broad shoulders, authoritative stance. "Evening, ma'am," he called out, his voice calm, professional. "Everything all right here?" "Flat tire, officer," I said, squinting against the light, "and no cell service to call for help." "Well, you're in luck then," he said, walking towards me. "Let's take a look." As he got closer, into the spill of my car's interior light, I got my first good look at him. And that's when the wrongness started to crystallize. His uniform, a dark navy, looked a little off. The fabric seemed too stiff, the creases too sharp, almost like a costume. And his badge, pinned a little too high on his chest, caught the light strangely. It looked too shiny, the lettering not quite right. Right, maybe it was just a different county's design. "I'm Officer Miller," he said, his voice smooth. He didn't offer a badge number, didn't ask for my license and registration right away. He assessed the flat. "Yep, that's a goner. You got a spare?" "Yeah, in the trunk. Just struggling a bit with the jack." "No problem, I can give you a hand with that. Or you can just wait in my patrol car where it's warmer, and I can call for a tow truck for you." "Radio in my car works fine." His smile was polite, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. They were pale, watchful, and lingered on me a moment too long. Was I just being paranoid? I thought. He seemed helpful enough, but my gut was screaming. The slightly off uniform, the too shiny badge, the way he was trying to get me into his car, away from mine. "That's okay, officer," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "I think I can manage with a spare if you could just help me with this jack. I don't want to be any trouble." His smile tightened. Just a fraction. No trouble at all, ma'am. But it is policy for me to ensure your safety. It's cold out. Best if you wait in my vehicle while I assess the situation. He gestured towards his patrol car. The blue in its flashing lights still seemed too bright. And there was no visible county or city marking on its doors. Just a generic police decal that looked like it could have been bought online. I'd really rather stay with my car, if that's all right, I said, taking a small step back. His eyes narrowed, almost imperceptibly. Man, I need you to cooperate, for your own safety. Now, if you'll just step over to my vehicle. He reached out, as if to take my arm. That's when I saw it clearly. His badge. The eagle at the top was facing the wrong way. A small detail, a stupid detail, but it was the final definitive click. This wasn't a cop. No, I said, my voice surprisingly firm. I'm fine right here. I'll wait for AA. His polite facade dropped like a stone. The smile vanished, replaced by a look of cold, hard anger. I wasn't asking, ma'am, he said, his voice no longer smooth, but a low, menacing growl. He took another step, his hand dropping towards his hip, where a bulky object was holstered, not a standard police-issue firearm. Something bigger. Adrenaline, poor and undiluted, flooded my system. There was no time to think, no time to reason. I did the only thing I could. I lunged for my car door, threw myself inside, slammed the lock, and fumbled the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life. You're not going anywhere, he shouted, yanking on my door handle. I slammed the car into drive and stomped on the gas. The Honda lurched forward, the flat tire thumping and screeching, the rim grinding against the asphalt. I didn't care. I just drove. In my rearview mirror, I saw him standing there for a second, stunned. Then he sprinted for his patrol car. Its lights were still flashing, that awful too bright blue. He threw it into gear, and he was after me. That terrifying drive on that shredded tire. His patrol car gaining on me on that deserted road, its spotlight trying to blind me, is a blur of pure, visceral fear. I fumbled with my phone. 1 bar. Please, God, 1 bar. Please, God, 1 bar. I hit 911, screaming my location, screaming about a fake cop, about the flat tire, about the car chasing me. The dispatcher's calm voice was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. She kept me on the line, told me real units were on their way. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 5 minutes, I saw them. The blessed, familiar flashing lights of actual sheriff's deputies approaching from the opposite direction. The fake patrol car behind me abruptly swerved, did a U-turn, and sped off back into the darkness, disappearing before the real cops could intercept him. The aftermath was chilling. The deputies confirmed no officer named Miller worked for their department, or any neighboring ones. No official patrol car matched the description of the one that had chased me. When I told them about the badge, the uniform, one of the older deputies exchanged a grim look with his partner. He told me there had been incidents, other women in rural counties across the state who'd encountered a man in a similar, authentic-looking but slightly off police setup. Some had reported being robbed, assaulted. Several had simply vanished, their cars found abandoned on lonely roadsides. He'd been hunting, using the trust people place in a uniform as his lure. My license plate, he'd had plenty of time to memorize it. He knew where I lived. They never caught him. The car was likely stolen, the uniform and equipment easily obtainable. He was a ghost, a predator who melted back into the shadows. I sold my car. I moved out of my little bungalow on Willow Creek Court within a month, breaking my lease, not caring about the cost. I live in a bigger city now, one with more lights, more people. But I never drive alone at night on deserted roads anymore. And sometimes, when I see those red and blue lights flashing in my rearview mirror, even on a busy street, even in broad daylight, my blood still runs cold, because I know he's still out there, somewhere. That man with the wrong badge, and the too bright smile. And I can't help but wonder whose lonely road he's patrolling tonight. And if the next woman he finds will be as lucky as I was to drive away. It's unsettling to think these events truly happened. And believe me, there are more horrors lurking in the shadows, waiting to be told. The soft click of file cabinet locks echoing through the empty precinct at 11:47 p.m. shouldn't have been possible. Detective Hayes had left the building 2 hours ago, and I'd watched his car pull out of the parking lot. Yet, there it was again. The distinctive metallic snap of someone accessing the secured cold case files in the records room. I paused in the hallway, my arms full of evidence boxes for tomorrow's court testimony, and listened to the deliberate rhythm of someone searching through documents with practiced efficiency. The sound stopped abruptly when my footsteps creaked on the old wooden floor, as if whoever was inside had suddenly realized they weren't alone. Through the frosted glass of the records room door, I could see the faint glow of a flashlight moving in careful, measured sweeps. But Detective Marcus Hayes was supposed to be at home with his family, not rifling through cold case files in a darkened police station after midnight. So why did every instinct tell me that the person inside was him, and that he was hiding something that could destroy us both? I'm Detective Sarah Chen, a 15-year veteran of the Portland Police Bureau's Major Crimes Unit. For the past year, I'd been working with Detective Hayes on cold case murders, brutal killings from the 1990s that had remained unsolved, until Hayes' recent breakthrough work brought closure to grieving families. Hayes was a legend, 25 years on the force, with a clearance rate that made younger detectives study his methods like scripture. His specialty was breathing life into forgotten cases, finding the overlooked detail that cracked everything wide open. In 12 months, he'd solved 8 murders that had been gathering dust for over 2 decades. But tonight, something about his methods was bothering me in ways I couldn't articulate. The next morning during our weekly case review, I paid closer attention to Hayes' presentations. He was discussing the Morrison murder from 1994, a strangulation case that had stumped investigators for years. The killer arranged her jewelry on the nightstand in a specific pattern, Hayes said, clicking through crime scene photos. Earrings, then necklace, then bracelet, left to right. Classic OCD behavior. I'd studied the Morrison file extensively. The jewelry detail wasn't mentioned anywhere in the reports, witness statements, or crime scene notes. It wasn't in any photographs either. Where did that information come from? I asked. Hayes' eyes met mine with an intensity that made my skin crawl. Experience, Chen. When you've been doing this as long as I have, you learn to read between the lines. But that wasn't reading between lines. That was inside knowledge. Over the following weeks, I started documenting Hayes' unusual insights. Time after time, he'd include details that weren't in any official documentation. Specific positioning of objects, behavioral patterns, intimate knowledge of crime scenes that only someone who'd been there could possess, day ties that only the killer would know. I began my own investigation, working late nights and weekends, cross-referencing Hayes' solved cases with his work history. What I discovered made my blood freeze. Every murder Hayes had solved occurred during periods when he was working in that exact geographic area. The Morrison murder in 1994. Hayes was a patrol officer in that district. The Chen strangling in 1996. Hayes had been temporarily assigned to that precinct. The pattern was too consistent to be coincidental. But the most damning evidence came when I accessed Hayes' personnel file. In 1993, he'd been suspended following a domestic violence complaint that described him as obsessively controlling with a disturbing fascination with crime scene photographs. The complaint had been withdrawn, but the details matched the behavioral profile of the killer in every case Hayes had solved. I started feeling watched. Fetus on my desk would be subtly disturbed, a folder slightly askew, a pen moved from where I'd left it. Every time Hayes approached my workspace, dread settled in my stomach like lead. Was I losing my mind? He was a decorated officer, a family man, a pillar of the department. But the evidence was mounting. Then I found the photograph. Tucked into an old file was a picture of a suspect from a 1991 case. A man who'd been questioned by Hayes and then vanished without a trace. This man had possessed details that contradicted Hayes' official narrative. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Hayes wasn't solving these murders. He was cleaning up his own work. He was identifying and eliminating anyone who might hold information that could implicate him, then framing convenient scapegoats to close his own cases. And now, I was a loose end. I spent 2 sleepless nights gathering evidence, building a timeline that screamed corruption and murder. The pattern was undeniable. A string of unsolved homicides from the late 80s and early 90s, all in areas where Hayes had been stationed. Then, a lull, coinciding with his promotion to detective. Now, as a cold case investigator, he was revisiting his own crimes. I couldn't wait any longer. I had to confront him. Hayes was at his desk when I approached, staring at old case photos on his monitor. I laid my compiled evidence in front of him. "I know what you are," I said. He turned slowly, a serene smile spreading across his face. "Took you long enough, Chen." He gestured to my documentation. "Impressive work. Very thorough." "Why?" I whispered. "Why not? I'm good at it. Always have been." He leaned back casually. "You see, Chen, I've been planning to add you to my list of cold cases for quite some time. Ever since you started asking questions about details that weren't in the files." The confession came easily, as if he'd been waiting years to tell someone. 26 murders over 15 years. All carefully planned, perfectly executed. And when I became a detective, I realized I could solve them myself. Control the narrative. Frame the right people. You've been destroying innocent lives. I've been providing closure while protecting myself. Win-win. His smile was arctic. The beauty is that everyone thinks I'm brilliant. They never question my methods. He stood, his hand moving to his service weapon. "You're going to be my next cold case, Chen. Missing detective probably killed by someone she was investigating. Very tragic. I'll solve it myself. Naturally. I already sent everything to internal affairs," I lied, backing toward the door. For the first time, his confidence wavered. "You're bluffing. Check your email." He pulled out his phone, and when he saw I wasn't lying, I had sent him a copy as insurance. His face changed completely. "This complicates things," he said, reaching for his weapon. I was already running, screaming for help as I burst into the bullpen. Within seconds, the building erupted in chaos. Hayes was cornered, weapon drawn. When uniformed officers took him down, the investigation that followed revealed the full scope of his crimes. Hayes had been killing for over 2 decades, using his badge to stay ahead of investigations and eliminate witnesses. He confessed to 28 murders and received multiple life sentences. But the victory felt hollow. My trust in the system was shattered. The thin blue line had hidden a monster for decades. Sometimes late at night when I'm working alone, I wonder about other cold case legends in other departments. How many brilliant detectives have insights that are just a little too perfect? Because the scariest monsters are the ones who carry badges and promise to protect us. They're the ones we never see coming until it's far too late. It's unsettling to think what those in uniform truly face. Don't go anywhere, because another chapter of real-life dread from the police files is coming up. The knock at my door came at 9:43 p.m. on a Tuesday. 3 sharp raps followed by a pause, then 3 more. Not the hurried knocking of a neighbor in distress, or the tentative tap of someone unsure they had the right address. This was authoritative, practiced, the kind of knock that demanded an answer. I was settling in for the night, remote in hand, when those knocks echoed through my small ranch house in suburban Phoenix. Through the peephole, I could see 2 men in dark suits standing under my porch light, their faces serious, but professional. The taller one held up what looked like a police badge, close enough to the glass that I could make out the metallic gleam. "Ma'am, we're detectives with Phoenix PD," the shorter one called out. "We need to ask you a few questions about an incident in your neighborhood." Something in my stomach twisted. Not fear exactly, but that primitive instinct that whispers when something isn't quite right. Maybe it was the way they stood too close together, or how their eyes seemed to be scanning my windows rather than focusing on the door. But I pushed the feeling down. These were police officers. What did I have to be afraid of? "Can I see some identification?" I called through the door, my hand hesitating on the deadbolt. The taller man stepped closer, pressing his badge against the peephole. But in that moment, as the metal caught the light, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The star was slightly crooked, and the lettering looked just a little too perfect, too new. Real badges get worn. Real badges show the daily wear being carried, handled, used. This one looked like it had come straight from a costume shop. My name is Linda Vasquez, and until that night in March 2023, I thought I was pretty good at spotting trouble. I'm a 34-year-old accountant who's lived alone for 6 years, ever since my divorce. My house sits on a quiet cul-de-sac in Ahwatukee, where the biggest crime is usually teenagers tagging the neighborhood mailboxes. I'd moved to this area specifically because it felt safe. Good lighting, neighbors who looked out for each other, regular police patrols. The kind of place where real detectives wouldn't need to show up unannounced at nearly 10 p.m. unless something serious had happened. What kind of incident? I asked, still not opening the door. There was a break-in 2 streets over, the shorter man replied. The suspect fled in this direction. We're canvassing the area to see if anyone noticed suspicious activity. That sounded plausible. Break-ins weren't uncommon in Phoenix, and police did sometimes canvass neighborhoods, but something about their demeanor felt off. Real cops had a certain energy when they were working an active case. Urgency, focus, the kind of intensity that comes from being on duty. These men seemed too relaxed, too prepared. We really need to come inside to talk. The taller one added, there are some details we can't discuss on your doorstep. Every alarm bell in my head started ringing. Police officers conducting a neighborhood canvass don't need to come inside. They ask their questions at the door, take notes, and move on to the next house. The insistence on entering my home was the first major red flag. I'm comfortable talking here, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Through the peephole, I watched them exchange a look. The shorter man reached into his jacket, not threateningly, but purposefully, like he was accessing something he'd prepared for this moment. Ma'am, this is an active investigation, he said, his tone becoming slightly more forceful. We need your cooperation. If you're not comfortable opening the door, we can wait while you call the station to verify our credentials. That offer should have reassured me, but it had the opposite effect. Why would they suggest I call to verify them, unless they were confident their cover story would hold up? Unless they had a way to intercept or reroute that call. I stepped back from the door, my heart hammering against my ribs. Every instinct I had was screaming that these men were not police officers, that whatever they wanted from me had nothing to do with any neighborhood break-in. Moving as quietly as possible, I retrieved my cell phone from the coffee table and dialed 911. When the dispatcher answered, I whispered my address and asked if any officers had been dispatched to my location. Let me check, the dispatcher said. I could hear keyboard clicking in the background. No, ma'am, we don't have any units assigned to your address tonight. Are you in immediate danger? The phone nearly slipped from my trembling hands. The men outside weren't police officers. They were imposters, wearing fake badges, using false pretenses to try to gain entry to my home. The break-in story was a lie designed to make me open my door to strangers. There are 2 men at my door claiming to be detectives, I whispered. They have badges, but you don't have anyone here. Stay on the line, the dispatcher said urgently. I'm sending units to your location now. Do not open your door. Outside, the knocking resumed, more insistent now. Ma'am, we know you're in there. We can see the light from your television. Please open the door so we can complete our investigation. The way he said complete our investigation sent chills down my spine. Investigation of what? If they weren't real police, what were they really investigating? And why in my house specifically? I crept to the living room window and carefully peered through a gap in the blinds. The 2 men were no longer standing casually at my door. The shorter one was walking around the perimeter of my house, testing windows, while the taller one remained at the front door, no longer bothering to knock. They were casing my home, looking for alternative entry points. My hands shook as I double-checked every lock. Front door, back door, all the windows. The house felt smaller suddenly, like a trap rather than a sanctuary. These men had specifically targeted me, had come prepared with fake badges and a rehearsed story, which meant this wasn't random. They knew where I lived, probably knew I lived alone, and had planned this approach carefully. Ma'am, the dispatcher was still on the line. Units are approximately 4 minutes out. Can you tell me what the suspects are doing now? One of them is walking around my house. I whispered, moving away from the window. Checking the windows? That's when I heard it. The soft scraping sound of someone testing the latch on my bedroom window. The window I'd opened earlier to let in the cool evening air, secured only by a flimsy screen. They'd found their way in. I ran to the bedroom just as the screen popped free, clattering to the ground outside. Through the open window, I could see the shorter man's silhouette as he prepared to climb through. His professional demeanor was gone now, replaced by the focused intensity of someone who'd done this before. "They're breaking in," I said into the phone, no longer bothering to whisper. The man at the window heard my voice and smiled. A cold, predatory expression that had nothing to do with police work and everything to do with the thrill of a successful hunt. "Just want to talk, Linda," he said, and the fact that he knew my name made my blood freeze. "Been watching you for a while. Know your routine. Know you live alone. Know you don't have anyone coming to check on you." I slammed the bedroom door and dragged my dresser in front of it, my adrenaline providing strength I didn't know I had. Behind me, I could hear him climbing through the window, his feet hitting my bedroom floor with soft thuds. "Linda?" His voice was closer now, just on the other side of the door. "We're going to have that conversation whether you cooperate or not. Might as well make it easy on yourself." The front door handle rattled as the taller man tested it from outside. They had me surrounded, trapped in my own home with nowhere to run. That's when I remembered the gun. My ex-husband had insisted I get a concealed carry permit after our divorce, convinced that a woman living alone needed protection. I'd taken the classes, bought a small pistol, and then promptly forgotten about it, storing it in a lockbox in my closet. Now, with someone in my bedroom and another trying to break down my front door, it felt like the difference between life and death. The dresser scraped across the floor as the man in my bedroom pushed against the door. He wasn't rushing. He knew I was trapped, knew the police weren't coming, or so he thought, and was taking his time to savor my fear. "You know what I think, Linda?" he said conversationally. "I think you've got something that belongs to us, something you might not even know you have." I retrieved the gun from its lockbox, my hands shaking so badly I could barely work the combination. Behind me, the bedroom door was opening inch by inch as he forced his way past the dresser. "See, your ex-husband Tom made some bad choices before he moved to California." The voice continued. "Took something from people who don't like to be stolen from, and we think he might have left it with you for safekeeping. Tom, they weren't random criminals. They were looking for something specific, something connected to my ex-husband's gambling debts and questionable business associates. Something I knew nothing about." The gun felt impossibly heavy in my hands as I turned toward the bedroom door. The man was almost through now, just his shoulder and arm visible as he squeezed past the displaced dresser. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, raising the pistol with both hands the way I'd been taught. "And I don't care. Get out of my house." He stepped fully into view then, and I could see his face clearly for the first time. Mid-40s, weathered features, eyes that held no warmth or humanity. This wasn't someone who could be reasoned with or frightened off. "Tom always said you were the smart one," he said, taking a step toward me. "Shame you're not smart enough to know when you're beat." That's when the sirens finally reached my neighborhood, growing louder as they approached my street. The man's confidence wavered for the first time, his head turning toward the sound. "Sounds like your backup isn't coming," I said, trying to project more courage than I felt. He looked back at me, and for a moment, I thought he might rush me anyway. But then the front door exploded inward as the second man kicked it open, and I heard him shout, "Cops! We gotta go!" The man in my bedroom gave me one last look, not angry or frustrated, but almost disappointed, like I'd failed to live up to his expectations. "This isn't over, Linda," he said. "Tom's debt doesn't just disappear because we had to leave tonight." He turned and squeezed back through the window with practiced efficiency, dropping to the ground outside just as police flashlights began sweeping across my backyard. I heard running footsteps, shouts, and then the slam of car doors as they escaped into the night. The real police officers who flooded into my house found me sitting on my bedroom floor, still holding the gun, shaking like a leaf. They were professional and compassionate, taking my statement, photographing the damage, dusting for prints that would ultimately lead nowhere. The investigation revealed that the fake badges were high-quality reproductions, probably purchased online or through criminal contacts who specialized in law enforcement equipment. The men had used my ex-husband's real name and enough personal details to suggest they'd been researching me for some time. But they never found the men themselves. No arrests were made, no charges filed. The case remains open, filed away in some detective's cabinet as another unsolved home invasion attempt. I moved out of that house 3 weeks later, breaking my lease and forfeiting my security deposit. I couldn't sleep there anymore. Couldn't walk through my bedroom without seeing that man's face. Couldn't open my front door without remembering the sound of fake authority demanding entry. I tried calling Tom in California, but his number had been disconnected. His former employer said he'd quit suddenly and left no forwarding address. Whatever he'd stolen, whatever debt he'd left behind, he'd disappeared rather than face the consequences. Which means those consequences are still out there, still looking for resolution. Last month, I got a call at my new apartment from someone claiming to be from a debt collection agency. They said they had questions about Tom's outstanding obligations and wanted to schedule a time to meet in person. I hung up immediately and changed my phone number the next day. But sometimes, late at night, I hear knocking at my door and freeze, wondering if this time they found me again, wondering if the next badge they show me will be real, or if they've simply gotten better at making the fake ones. The thing about debt is that it never really goes away. It just transfers to whoever's left behind. The reality of these events is often more horrifying when you realize who had to confront them. Our next story is a stark reminder of that truth. The first time the company GPS inexplicably rerouted me down Old Miller's Road, past the skeletal silhouette of the abandoned Holloway house, I just figured it was a glitch. The second time, an hour later, that same insistent digital voice telling me to turn left on Miller's Road. A cold knot of unease tightened in my gut. But the third time, as my patrol car's headlights swept across that decaying porch, and I saw a faint light flicker in an upstairs window where no light should be, the unease turned into something sharp and cold. Why was my dispatch sending me back here? And why did it suddenly feel like I wasn't just patrolling, but being led? My name is Mike. I'm 26. And for the past 2 years, I've been working the graveyard shift for Guardian Security Solutions in the slightly down on its heels town of Oak Haven. It's mostly mind-numbing, checking locks on deserted industrial parks, cruising through silent office complexes, trying to stay awake with lukewarm coffee and bad talk radio. The pay covered my student loans, and the solitude usually was a welcome change from my noisy daytime roommates. My patrol route was mapped out on a company-issued tablet, the GPS usually as reliable as the sunrise. The first subtle sign that this particular Tuesday night was going to deviate from the script was a burst of static on my radio as I was logging in with dispatch. It cleared, and dispatcher Sarah's voice came through, a little tinny. Evening, Unit 7. All quiet on your end. Standard check-in. But just before she spoke, I could have sworn I heard a faint, almost inaudible whisper under the static, like a distorted voice saying, "Miller's. He's on Miller's now." I shook my head. Too much caffeine. Still, as I pulled away from the main office, I noticed a dark sedan parked across the street. Engine off. No one visible inside. It hadn't been there before. Just a coincidence, right? But a tiny prickle of unease, like unseen eyes on my back, made me glance in my rear view a few too many times as I started my route. The first reroute happened around 1 a.m. I was heading towards the Blackstone Industrial Park, my usual first checkpoint. Suddenly, the GPS on the tablet chirped. Rerouting. Turn left on Miller's Road. Miller's Road? It wasn't on my designated path. It was a creepy, unpaved track leading past a string of mostly abandoned farmhouses and ending near the old, condemned Holloway place. A 2-story Victorian that had been empty for decades, subject of all kinds of local spooky legends. Though I never put much stock in that stuff. Probably a system update, or they want a visual on that derelict property, I muttered, turning onto the bumpy road. The Holloway house loomed, dark and silent against the moonless sky. Nothing. I continued, the GPS eventually looping me back to my proper route. An hour later, same thing. Rerouting. Turn left on Miller's Road. This time, as I passed the Holloway house, I noticed a fresh tire track in the muddy verge, leading towards the overgrown driveway. And was that a faint light, just for a second, in one of the upstairs windows? I radioed dispatch, Unit 7 to base. Just checking, am I supposed to be patrolling Miller's Road tonight? GPS keeps sending me this way. Sarah's voice came back, sounding genuinely confused. Negative, Unit 7. Your route is standard. No deviations logged. No deviations logged. You showing clear at Blackstone? Yeah. Clear now. I lied. A cold knot forming in my stomach. The GPS was definitely acting on its own. Or someone was feeding it bad data. The third time, around 3:30 a.m. I didn't even wait for the digital voice. The map on the tablet just changed, highlighting Miller's Road in an insistent blue. This time, the light in the Holloway house window was undeniable, a dim, flickering orange glow, like candlelight. And I saw a silhouette, briefly, pass in front of it. My heart hammered. This wasn't a glitch. Someone was in that house, and someone or something wanted me to see it. Was I just being paranoid? I asked myself, my hands gripping the wheel. Company policy was clear. Investigate any signs of unauthorized presence on or near patrol routes. But this felt different, like a trap. My radio crackled with static when I tried to call dispatch again. Unreachable. I was on my own, against my better judgment. A morbid curiosity mixed with a stupid sense of duty made me pull over, just short of the Holloway driveway. I grabbed my heavy maglite. The air was cold, smelling of damp earth, decaying leaves, and something else. A faint, coppery, metallic tang. As I crept towards the house, I heard a sound. Rhythmic. Thump. Scrape. Thump. Scrape. Coming from around the back. I moved silently along the side of the house, peering through a grimy window. The side porch door was ajar. The wood around the old lock splintered. I pushed it open slowly, the hinges groaning. The metallic smell was stronger inside. My flashlight beam danced across a dilapidated kitchen, then into a hallway. The scraping sound was louder now, coming from the basement. I found the basement door also ajar. The stairs were steep, rickety. My light cut through the oppressive darkness below. The basement was stone-walled, damp. In the center, a single bare bulb hung, casting long, dancing shadows. And beneath it, a man, his back to me, was working. He was large, dressed in dark, heavy work clothes. He was digging a shallow rectangular hole in the packed earth floor. Beside him, a long canvas-wrapped bundle, roughly human-sized. My blood ran cold. This wasn't squatters. This was something else. Something monstrous. Before I could react, before I could even breathe, he stopped digging. He straightened up slowly. Then he turned. His face was gaunt, shadowed, his eyes dark hollows in the dim light. But it was the smile that made my stomach clench. Slow, cold, utterly devoid of humanity. He knew I was there. Took you long enough, security man. He rasped, his voice like stones grinding together. Us wondering when they'd send someone to check on my project. He gestured with his shovel towards the hole, then towards the bundle. Almost done. I managed, my voice a choked whisper. Who sent me? He just chuckled. A dry, rattling sound. Doesn't matter now, does it? You're here, and you've seen. He took a step towards me, raising the shovel. I didn't wait. I turned and fled, scrambling up those rickety basement stairs, bursting out the side door, back into the oppressive darkness of the yard. I could hear him behind me, his heavy boots thudding, his guttural shouts surprisingly close. I ran from my car, fumbling for the keys, my hands slick with sweat. Just as I reached it, he was there, lunging from the shadows, the shovel arcing through the air. I threw myself sideways, the heavy metal edge missing my head by inches, smashing into the car's side window with a sickening crunch. I scrambled into the driver's seat, slammed the door, locked it. He was at the window, his face pressed against the shattered glass, that awful smile wider now, his eyes blazing with a terrifying, predatory light. I fumbled the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life. I threw it into reverse, tires spinning on the gravel, and then into drive, tearing down Miller's Road, not caring about the bumps, the ruts, just needing to get away. In my rearview mirror, I saw him standing in the driveway of the Holloway house, watching me go, the shovel still in his hand. He wasn't even trying to follow. He knew he didn't have to. I didn't stop driving until I reached the Oak Haven police station, babbling my incoherent story to a startled desk sergeant. They went out to the Holloway house, of course. Found the freshly dug hole in the basement. Found the canvas-wrapped bundle. It contained nothing but rocks and old rags. Found the splintered side door, but of the man there was no trace. The house was as empty and derelict as it had always supposedly been. Guardian Security Solutions investigated the GPS glitch. They found evidence of external unauthorized access to their routing system, but couldn't trace the source. They suggested I'd overreacted to a possible squatter, that my decision to enter the house alone was a breach of protocol. They fired me the next day. The tablet, my company phone, they were conveniently damaged beyond repair in my escape. No record of those phantom reroutes. I left Oak Haven. I couldn't stay. The thought of who they were, the ones who had so expertly lured me to that house, who had known my route, my schedule, chilled me to the bone. Was it someone at Guardian? Someone who knew the system? Or someone else entirely? Someone with a more sinister agenda, using me as a pawn in a game I didn't understand. Was I meant to be the next bundle in that hole? Or just a witness they needed to silence or discredit? I live in a different city now, a different life. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm driving a quiet, unfamiliar road, my GPS will flicker. And for a terrifying second, I'll see Miller's Road flash on the screen before it corrects itself. And I know with a certainty that never leaves me, that some routes are chosen for you, and you never really know who's holding the map, or what waits for you at the end of that deviating line. That was just one chilling glimpse into the terrors faced by those sworn to protect. Are you ready for another? Because the next haunting true story from the Force is right around the corner. I started seeing an old, decommissioned black and white Crown Victoria, the kind police departments auction off, parked a few streets over, sometimes for hours, always late at night. It had no official markings, just a vague security patrol decal on the side that looked like it had been printed off the internet. I never saw who was driving it, just the car, a silent, brooding presence in the sleeping neighborhood. Was I just being paranoid? I'd ask myself, connecting dots that weren't there. But the knot in my stomach tightened with each sighting. The escalation came one rainy Tuesday night. I was coming home late from a rare evening out with friends. As I turned onto our street, I saw it. The black and white Crown Vic, parked under a flickering streetlight about a block from our apartment. And getting out of the driver's side, dressed in that almost right uniform, was Mark. He was talking to a group of teenagers, his voice low but carrying an unmistakable tone of authority, his posture ramrod straight, his hand resting on that empty holster on his belt. The teenagers, initially defiant, quickly became subdued, then scattered, melting into the rainy darkness. Mark didn't see me. He got back into the Crown Vic and slowly drove off, disappearing around the corner. My heart hammered against my ribs. This wasn't just a weird hobby. This was something else, something dangerous. He was impersonating an officer, or something chillingly close to it. The odd jobs he worked, were they just a cover? I didn't sleep that night. The next morning I tried to talk to him, my voice carefully casual. "Hey, Mark, saw you out pretty late last night. Everything okay?" He just grunted, not meeting my eyes, stirring his instant coffee with a spoon. "Just checking on things. Neighborhood watch, you know." In a uniform, in that old cop car. He finally looked at me then, and his eyes, usually just dull and distant, held a new, sharp glint, a flicker of something cold and possessive. "Someone has to keep order around here, Liam," he said, his voice flat. "The real cops, they don't see half of what goes on. They're too busy too, constrained." He took a sip of his coffee, This neighborhood needs a firmer hand. Over the next few days, the signs became more overt. I'd hear him on the phone late at night, his voice low, using police jargon, talking about suspicious individuals, maintaining a perimeter, potential threats. I found a detailed map of our neighborhood spread out on his desk. Certain houses circled in red ink. My girlfriend Jenna's house was one of them. A cold dread washed over me. What was he planning? The climax arrived on a Saturday night. Mark had left hours ago, in his uniform, driving the Crown Vic. Jenna was over. We were watching a movie, trying to ignore the knot of anxiety that had become my constant companion. Around midnight, we heard it, a sharp rap on the front door. Not a friendly knock, authoritative. My blood ran cold. I crept to the peephole. Mark, standing there in full uniform, his face grim, his hand resting on that heavy flashlight on his belt, the one that looked more like a nightstick. Liam. His voice called out, low and controlled. Open up. We need to talk. Jenna looked at me, her eyes wide with fear. Don't, she whispered. What do you want, Mark? I called back, my voice shaking. Just a friendly chat, Rumi, about neighborhood security. Cooperation. I knew with a chilling certainty that this wasn't about a chat. This was about intimidation. About control. He knew Jenna was here. Her house was circled on his map. Mark, this has to stop, I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. This isn't right. You're not a cop. A long silence. Then, his voice, no longer controlled, but laced with a chilling, raw anger. Someone has to be... Liam. One has to be Liam. Someone has to protect this place from the filth. They wouldn't let me. They said I wasn't fit. But I see what they don't. I know what needs to be done. He rattled the doorknob. And I know who's a threat, and who's an accomplice. His eyes, through the peephole, were blazing with a dangerous, fanatical light. You wouldn't want to be seen as uncooperative, would you, Liam? It might make things difficult for you. And for Jenna, the threat hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. He was unhinged. Dangerous. I fumbled for my phone. Dialed 911. My voice a choked whisper as I explained the situation, the impersonator, the threat. Mark heard me. He started pounding on the door, roaring. You'll regret this, Liam. You'll all regret this. The real police arrived with sirens blaring, their blue lights washing over our terrified faces. Mark didn't resist. He just stood there, his shoulders slumped, the fight suddenly gone out of him, that almost uniform looking pathetic and absurd in the harsh glare of real authority. The aftermath was unsettling. The decommissioned Crown Vic wasn't properly registered to him. The uniform was a collection of easily bought security gear. He had no actual weapons, just a heavy flashlight and an air of menace he'd cultivated. He claimed it was all just a harmless hobby that he was practicing for when he reapplied to the academy. He denied ever threatening anyone, without clear evidence of him committing a specific crime while impersonating an officer. Beyond scaring some teenagers, the charges were minor. He got probation, a restraining order to stay away from me and Jenna, and mandatory psychiatric evaluation. I moved out of that apartment the next week, broke the lease, didn't care about the cost. I couldn't live there anymore, couldn't shake the feeling of his obsessive gaze, the memory of that cold glint in his eyes. Jenna and I are still together, but we're more cautious now, more aware of the thin veneer of normalcy that can hide a deep, unsettling darkness. They say Mark eventually left Oakhaven, but I still see him in my nightmares, patrolling those quiet suburban streets in his phantom cruiser, his eyes scanning the shadows, keeping order. And sometimes very late at night, when I hear a distant siren, or the crackle of a radio, a part of me still wonders whose neighborhood he's decided to protect tonight, and what happens when someone finally pushes him past the point of just undeniable. They gushed out. I think knowledge don't lie.